The translation device made a soft clicking sound as Lauren adjusted the frequency dial for the third time that morning. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from nervousness about using the old equipment, but from worry about the children in the medical wing 2 floors below. The crystal lung disease had spread faster than anyone predicted, and the Ravathi colony's antibiotic supplies had run out 4 days ago. She typed the message carefully into the system, double-checking each word. The request was simple enough: medical supplies from the nearest Ravathi colony, possibly some spare oxygen filters if they had any to share. Nothing complicated. Nothing that should require more than a basic cargo transport and maybe a medical consultant. She pressed the transmit button and watched the green light blink 3 times, confirming the message had gone out. What Lauren did not know was that the translation device she was using had been manufactured 60 years ago, back when the Ravathi first joined the Galactic Communication Network. The protocols had changed. The emergency codes had been updated. And most importantly, the Universal Translator's Dictionary had expanded to include hundreds of new species and their various ways of calling for help. Her message, which should have simply reached the colony administrator on the neighboring world, instead bounced through 7 different relay stations. Each station added its own interpretation. Each system tried to clarify what it thought was an unclear distress signal. By the time the message reached human space, it had been flagged, amplified, and marked with every emergency designation the network could apply. The Frontier listening post near the Andromeda Gate picked it up at 3:42 station time. Station Commander Willis had been reviewing supply requisitions when the alert chimed. He glanced at the screen, saw the garbled text, and almost deleted it. False alarms came through twice a week, usually from automated systems misreading solar flares or cometary debris. But Harper, the young signals analyst on duty, caught something in the data stream. She pulled up the full message and ran it through 3 different translation matrices. Buried in the noise and static, certain words kept appearing. Children, sick, medicine, dying. "Commander, you need to see this," Harper said, her voice tight with concern. Willis walked over to her station and read the screen. The message was a mess, barely coherent, but those words stood out clearly. He knew the protocols. Any message containing those specific terms, especially in combination, got forwarded immediately to the Colonial Defense Network. "Flag it and send it up the chain," Willis ordered. "Mark it priority 3. Harper's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Sir, with respect, this mentions children in danger. That's automatic priority 1 under humanitarian protocols." Willis hesitated for only a moment. Priority 1 meant automatic escalation all the way to Fleet Command. It meant disrupting regular operations. It meant committing resources before they even knew if the threat was real. But he looked at those words again. Children, dying. "Make it priority 1, he said. Within 2 hours, the message reached Earth's Unified Fleet Command. Admiral Foster was in a strategy meeting when her aide interrupted, handing her a data pad with an apologetic expression. She read the message twice, frowning at the garbled text and unclear origin. "Do we know who sent this?" she asked. "No, ma'am. The signal's been through too many relays. We can trace it to a general region but not a specific source." "What's the threat assessment?" "Unknown. Could be an invasion, could be a plague outbreak, could be a natural disaster. The translation is too corrupted to tell." Foster considered her options. The smart military choice would be to send a small reconnaissance team, maybe a single ship to investigate. That was the safe choice, the logical choice, but she thought about those words again. Children, medicine, help. "How fast can we mobilize a response fleet?" she asked. Her aide blinked in surprise. "A fleet, ma'am, for an unconfirmed signal." "Answer the question." 72 hours for a standard battle group. Less if we pull from patrol routes." Foster shook her head. "Not good enough. Send the emergency mobilization order to every human ship within range of those coordinates. Military, civilian, corporate, doesn't matter. Anyone who can respond, tell them we have a potential humanitarian crisis and we need immediate assistance. Ma'am, that could mean hundreds of ships. Good, someone asked for help, and we're going to make sure they get it. The mobilization order went out across human space at 1547 hours Earth Standard Time. On the orbital shipyards above Mars, 3 heavy cruisers broke from their patrol rotation and began plotting jump coordinates. A corporate mining fleet near the Jupiter colonies diverted course, their captains volunteering their escort ships for the mission. Even the independent cargo haulers, the small operators who usually avoided military operations, started arriving at the designated rally point. Captain Davis received the alert while his ship, Steady Hand, was hauling construction materials to a frontier outpost. He read the message, looked at his co-pilot, and changed course without hesitation. His ship was not designed for combat. It had no weapons beyond basic point defense systems, but it had cargo holds that could carry medical supplies, and it had engines that could get those supplies where they needed to go. Across 40 different star systems, the same decision was being made. Colony defense ships, corporate security vessels, retired military craft that had been converted to civilian use, even a few ships that had until recently been operating on the wrong side of legal boundaries. They all started moving toward Rally Point Gamma 7. Dr. Ruth was in her small apartment on the outskirts of New Seattle when she saw the news feeds. The mobilization was all anyone could talk about. She had retired from active medical service 5 years ago, back when her hands started shaking too much for surgery. But she could still diagnose. She could still treat. And if someone out there needed medical help, she still had something to offer. She packed her old medical kit, called in a favor from a former colleague who had a small transport ship, and headed for the nearest launch facility. Her family thought she was crazy. Her friends told her to let the young ones handle it. But Ruth had spent 40 years treating people who had no one else to turn to. She was not about to stop now. On Revathi Prime, Lauren checked her console again, confused by the lack of response. Usually the neighboring colony replied within a few hours. It had been almost a full day now. She wondered if the message had even gone through properly. She made a note to check the transmission logs in the morning and went down to the medical wing to see if there was anything else she could do to help the sick children. 317 ships gathered at Rally Point Gamma 7 over the course of 48 hours. The neutral space station that served as the meeting point had never seen so much traffic in its entire operational history. Station Administrator Cho had to implement emergency traffic control protocols just to keep the arriving vessels from colliding with each other. The ships came from everywhere. Military dreadnoughts fresh from Earth's orbital defense network arrived alongside converted colony transports that had been pressed into service. Corporate security frigates shared formation space with independent cargo haulers whose paint was more rust than color. There were even 3 ships that had, until very recently, been flagged as pirates before their crews accepted amnesty deals and joined the relief effort. Captain Davis brought Steady Hand into formation and looked out at the assembled fleet with something like awe. His cargo hauler was one of the smaller vessels present, dwarfed by the military ships and their massive hulls. He had expected maybe a dozen ships to respond, perhaps 20 if the situation was truly serious. But this was something else entirely. His communications officer, a young woman named Riley, was busy trying to sort through the dozens of hailing requests coming from other ships. Every captain wanted to coordinate. Everyone had questions. Nobody seemed to know what the actual plan was. "Sir, we're being hailed by the corporate vessel Meridian Reach," Riley said. "They're asking if we have medical supplies on board. Tell them we've got empty cargo holds ready to be filled. Whatever they need moved, we can move it." Davis had been hauling cargo for 15 years, ever since he left the Colonial Defense Force. He knew how to keep a ship running on minimal resources, how to squeeze extra thrust from aging engines, and how to navigate through dangerous space. But he had never been part of anything like this. The military ships intimidated him with their size and firepower, but he reminded himself that cargo haulers served a purpose too. Someone had to transport the supplies. Someone had to get the medicine and equipment where it needed to go. At the edge of the formation, a small medical transport approached the rally point. It was barely large enough to qualify as a ship, more of a long-range shuttle with upgraded engines and life support. Dr. Ruth sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls despite the tremor that had forced her retirement. Flying was easier than surgery. Flying she could still do. The station traffic controller hailed her with obvious confusion. "Medical transport, state your business and authorization." "This is Dr. Ruth Chen, civilian medical volunteer. I'm here to join the relief fleet." There was a pause. "Ma'am, this is a military operation. We don't have clearance codes for civilian volunteers." "Then get me someone who can make that decision. I've got 40 years of emergency medicine experience and a ship full of medical supplies. If someone out there needs help, I'm going to help them." The traffic controller connected her to Admiral Foster's command ship. Ruth found herself on a video call with a stern-looking woman who studied her with sharp eyes. "Dr. Chen, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this could be a combat situation. We don't know what we're flying into." "Admiral, with all due respect, I've worked in frontier hospitals during plague outbreaks, pirate raids, and colony failures. I know what combat situations look like. And if there are people who need medical attention, they don't care whether I have military authorization or not." Foster was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Welcome to the fleet, Doctor. Stay in the civilian transport formation and follow the designated medical ship protocols." "Thank you, Admiral." As more ships continued to arrive, the various human factions began to organize themselves into working groups. The military vessels formed the outer defensive perimeter. The corporate ships, with their advanced sensors and communication equipment, took up coordination positions. The cargo haulers and transports gathered in the center, ready to distribute supplies, and the medical ships, both military and civilian, formed their own support group. There was tension, of course. The military commanders did not entirely trust the corporate security forces, who in turn viewed the independent operators with suspicion. The amnestied pirates kept to themselves, knowing that not everyone had forgiven their past actions, but they were all here for the same reason. Someone had asked for help. Admiral Foster's flagship, Resilient Dawn, arrived at the rally point and immediately took command position. Foster surveyed the assembled fleet through the viewscreen, mentally calculating logistics, supply lines, and tactical formations. She had commanded fleet operations before, but never anything this diverse. Never anything this large responding to such an unclear threat. She opened a general communication channel to all ships. Her image appeared on every bridge, every cockpit, every command deck in the formation. "This is Admiral Foster. I know many of you have questions. I know you want to understand what we're facing. The truth is, we don't know. We received a distress signal. It was garbled, partially corrupted, but the message was clear enough. Someone needs help. Someone's children are in danger. That's all we need to know." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "Humanity has a code. It's not written in any official document, it's not part of any government charter, but it's something we all understand. When someone asks for help, we answer. We don't ask what's in it for us. We don't calculate the cost. We don't debate whether they deserve our assistance. We just answer." Across the fleet, crews listened in silence. Some had been skeptical about responding. Some had come only because they were ordered to. But hearing those words, understanding what they represented, changed something. This was not about military strategy or political advantage. This was about being human. Depart for the source coordinates in 6 hours, Foster continued. Use that time to coordinate with your neighboring ships. Medical vessels, make sure your supplies are cataloged and ready for rapid deployment. Combat ships, weapons to standby status only. We don't know if we'll face hostility, but we will not be the ones to fire first. And to everyone here, regardless of your background or your reasons for coming, thank you. Thank you for remembering what it means to help someone in need. The channel closed. Across the fleet, crews began final preparations. Captain Davis coordinated with 3 other cargo haulers to establish supply distribution protocols. Dr. Ruth linked her medical database with the military hospital ships, sharing treatment information and resource lists. The corporate vessels calibrated their sensors for maximum range scanning. And on Revathi Prime, Lauren finally discovered the error. She was reviewing the communication logs, trying to understand why no one had responded, when she saw the transmission report. Her simple request for medical supplies had been amplified and broadcast across multiple systems. The error codes showed protocol mismatches, translation failures, and emergency escalations. Her hands went cold as she pulled up the long-range sensor data. The display showed energy signatures, hundreds of them, all converging on her star system, all moving at high speed, all big enough to be warships. She ran to find Prime Minister Hollis, her heart racing with terror at what she had accidentally done. Prime Minister Hollis stood in the Revathi Defense Command Center, staring at the tactical display with growing horror. 317 contacts, all of them massive, all of them approaching from the same vector, an invasion fleet. It could be nothing else. How long until they reach weapons range? Hollis asked, keeping his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Approximately 4 hours at current speed, the defense coordinator replied. Sir, our satellites are not designed for combat. We have maybe a dozen orbital defense platforms. Against a fleet that size, we can't even slow them down. Hollis thought of the children in the medical centers, already struggling to breathe through crystal-damaged lungs. He thought of the cities below, unprepared and vulnerable. The Revathi had always been a peaceful people. They had joined the galactic community offering trade and culture, not military strength. And now someone had decided they were easy prey. Lauren stood nearby, trying to explain what had happened, but Hollis could barely process her words. A communication error, a mistranslated request for medicine. It seemed impossible that such a mistake could summon an armada. No, this had to be something else. Perhaps raiders had intercepted the signal. Perhaps some hostile species saw an opportunity in their weakness. Activate all defense systems, Hollis ordered. Prepare evacuation protocols for the primary cities, and someone get me a communication channel to whoever is leading that fleet. The human armada dropped out of quantum drive at the edge of the Revathi system in a carefully coordinated maneuver. 317 ships materialized in formation, their running lights creating a field of stars against the darkness of space. On the flagship Resilient Dawn, Admiral Foster watched the sensor data populate her screens. Scan the system, she ordered. I want to know what we're dealing with. Sensors Officer Park worked quickly, his instruments sweeping across the Revathi worlds. Ma'am, detecting one inhabited planet, approximately 4 billion population, multiple orbital stations, civilian configuration, some satellite defense systems, but they're powering up. I think they're preparing for combat. Foster frowned. That did not make sense. If they needed help, why would they activate weapons? Are we picking up any hostile forces, any attacking vessels? Negative, ma'am. The system appears clear except for local traffic. Then why are they going to battle stations? Foster wondered aloud. She opened a communication channel, hoping the translation systems would work better than whatever had garbled the original distress call. This is Admiral Foster of the Human Relief Armada. We received your distress signal and have come to render assistance. Please respond and advise on the nature of your emergency. In the Ravathi Command Center, the translation came through perfectly clear this time. The words appeared on Holly's screen, and he read them 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Relief Armada, assistance. These humans expected him to believe they had brought 300 warships on a humanitarian mission. It's a trick, Holly said firmly. No species mobilizes this kind of force just to help strangers. They want us to lower our defenses. Lauren stepped forward, her voice desperate. Sir, please, I made a mistake with the old communication system. I was trying to request medical supplies. The message must have been misinterpreted as an emergency. These humans might actually be here to help. With warships, with an invasion fleet, Hollis shook his head. No, this is exactly what the Krasic did to the Telani colonies. They offered help, waited until defenses were down, then struck. I won't let that happen here. Aboard Resilient Dawn, Admiral Foster received no response to her communication. The Ravathi defense satellites remained active, their targeting systems tracking the human vessels. Foster felt the situation slipping toward catastrophe. A misunderstanding could turn deadly very quickly with this many ships in close proximity. Harper, the young analyst who had first flagged the distress signal, was aboard the flagship as a translation consultant. She had been studying the Ravathi language and culture during the journey, preparing for first contact. Now she desperately searched through old databases, trying to understand what was happening. Admiral, I think I found something, Harper said, pulling up historical records. The Ravathi had several bad experiences with species offering help in exchange for territorial concessions. They were nearly conquered twice by species pretending to be allies. They have good reason to be suspicious. Foster understood immediately. The Ravathi saw an overwhelming force and assumed the worst because experience had taught them to expect betrayal. She needed to prove human intentions were different, and she needed to do it quickly before fear drove someone to make a terrible mistake. I need a volunteer, Foster announced to her senior staff. Someone willing to approach the planet alone, unarmed, carrying only medical supplies. Someone who can show them we mean what we say. Dr. Ruth's voice came through the communication channel before anyone else could respond. I'll go. Foster pulled up Ruth's file on her screen. Civilian, retired, no military training, flying a medical transport that would not survive a single hit from even the Ravathi's limited defense systems, but she had volunteered without hesitation. Dr. Chen, you understand this could be dangerous. Admiral, I've been in dangerous situations before, and right now, those people need to see that we're telling the truth. Let me show them. Foster made the decision. Permission granted, take your medical transport in slowly. Broadcast your intentions on all frequencies. And doctor, good luck. Ruth's small ship detached from the formation and began a careful approach toward Ravathi Prime. She broadcast continuously in every language her computer could translate. This is Dr. Ruth Chen, human physician. I carry medical supplies for crystal lung disease. I am unarmed. I request permission to land at your primary medical facility. In the Ravathi Command Center, sensors tracked the small ship's approach. Hollis watched it come, analyzing every detail. It was barely larger than a shuttle. One ship, one person. If this was a trick, it was an incredibly strange one. Sir, we're receiving medical data transmissions from the approaching vessel, a technician reported. Treatment protocols for crystal lung disease, pharmaceutical compositions, diagnostic procedures. It's all legitimate medical information. Lauren moved closer to Hollis. Sir, please, let the human land. Let them prove their intentions. What do we have to lose? Hollis was quiet for a long moment, watching that single small ship approach his world while hundreds of warships waited in the distance. Finally, he nodded. Clear them for landing at Capital Medical Center, but keep weapons trained on them. If this is a trick, we respond immediately. Ruth guided her ship through the atmosphere, her hands steady despite the ground-based weapons tracking her descent. She landed in the medical center's emergency bay, where dozens of Revathi soldiers waited with weapons drawn. She powered down her systems, opened the cargo bay, and stepped out alone. The Revathi were shorter than humans, with crystalline skin that refracted light in subtle patterns. They surrounded her, weapons aimed, clearly terrified despite their defensive posture. Ruth raised her hand slowly, then gestured to the cargo containers behind her. "I'm here to help," she said simply. "Your children are sick. I brought medicine." A Revathi doctor stepped forward cautiously, examining the containers. Inside were antibiotics, advanced enough to be worth a fortune, just sitting in open cases. Medical equipment that could save lives. Treatment protocols printed in Revathi language. Everything they needed, offered freely. "Why?" the Revathi doctor asked. "Why would you bring all of this?" Ruth smiled gently. "Because you asked for help, and because children are dying, that's all the reason we need." The Revathi medical staff brought a young child forward on a floating gurney. The girl could not have been more than 6 years old by human estimation. Her crystalline skin had taken on a cloudy, dull appearance, and each breath came with obvious difficulty. Ruth recognized the symptoms immediately from the medical files she had studied during the journey. "How long has she been symptomatic?" Ruth asked, kneeling beside the gurney so she was at eye level with the child. 11 days, the Revathi doctor replied, still keeping his distance. "The crystal formations have spread to both lungs. We've tried our standard treatments, but without the proper antibiotics, we can only manage her pain." Ruth opened her medical kit and pulled out a scanner. She moved slowly, explaining each action before she took it. "I'm going to scan her respiratory system. This won't hurt. The device just uses light waves to create an image of her lungs." The child looked frightened, but Ruth kept her voice calm and gentle. She had treated scared children across a dozen different human colonies. The species might be different, but fear was universal. So was the need for kindness. The scan results appeared on Ruth's portable display. The crystal lung infection had progressed further than she expected. Without treatment, the child had maybe 2 more days. With treatment, the prognosis was excellent. "I can help her," Ruth said, looking up at the Revathi doctor. "But I'll need your assistance. The antibiotic needs to be administered in a specific sequence with respiratory therapy. I can show you the procedure." For the next hour, Ruth worked alongside the Revathi medical staff. She demonstrated the treatment protocol, explained the science behind it, and answered every question. The soldiers with weapons gradually lowered them, watching as the human doctor focused entirely on saving a child's life. Within 30 minutes of the first antibiotic injection, the young girl's breathing began to improve. Within an hour, her crystalline skin started to clear. The Revathi doctor stared at the results in disbelief. "I've never seen crystal lung respond this quickly to treatment." "Your medicine was good," Ruth explained. "You had the right approach. You just needed this specific compound to break down the crystalline formations. The formula is in the data files I brought. You'll be able to synthesize it yourself." News of the successful treatment spread quickly through the medical center, and then to the command center. Prime Minister Hollis watched the video feed of the human doctor working to save Revathi children, and felt his certainty begin to crack. No invasion force sent healers ahead of soldiers. No conquerors shared their medical knowledge freely. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. "Admiral Foster, this is Prime Minister Hollis. I believe we may have misunderstood your intentions. On behalf of the Revathi people, I apologize for our hostile reception. We would welcome your assistance with our medical crisis." Foster felt relief wash over her. "Prime Minister, no apology necessary. We're here to help. What do you need?" The human fleet moved into orbit with the Revathi's permission. Medical teams began shuttle runs to the surface. Captain Davis and the other cargo haulers coordinated supply distribution to 7 different Revathi colonies. The corporate ships used their advanced sensors to identify areas with the highest concentration of sick patients. The military vessels maintained a protective perimeter, their weapons systems on standby but not actively targeting anything. Dr. Ruth coordinated the treatment effort from the primary medical center. She worked with Revathi physicians to establish protocols, train staff, and distribute the antibiotics. The relief effort fell into a smooth rhythm, humans and Revathi working together, saving lives. 3 weeks into the operation, the crystal lung outbreak was nearly under control. The mortality rate had dropped to almost zero. Children who had been struggling to breathe were playing again. The Revathi people had begun to understand that humans were genuinely there to help, asking for nothing in return. That was when the Krasik arrived. 3 warships dropped out of quantum drive at the system's edge. They were sleek, predatory vessels designed for intimidation and combat. Sensor's officer park detected them immediately and alerted Admiral Foster. "Ma'am, 3 unknown vessels entering the system. Configuration matches Krasik Dominion Registry. They're hailing us." Foster had read the reports about the Krasik. They were opportunistic, expanding their territory by targeting vulnerable species and forcing protection agreements. They must have seen the original Revathi distress signal days ago and deliberately waited for the situation to deteriorate before responding. The Krasik commander appeared on screen. Warlord Brent was a large, heavily armored figure with sharp features and cold eyes. He looked at Foster with barely concealed irritation. "Human vessel, you are trespassing in Krasik-protected space. The Revathi have requested our assistance. Depart immediately." Foster kept her voice level. "The Revathi requested no such thing. We're here at their invitation, providing humanitarian aid. You're welcome to verify that with Prime Minister Hollies. The Revathi system falls under our jurisdiction by treaty. Your presence is illegal." "What treaty?" "The Revathi are an independent species. They have no protection agreements with the Krasik Dominion." Brent's expression hardened. "That is about to change. Either you leave or we will remove you by force." Foster signaled her weapons officers to prepare but kept her external demeanor calm. "Warlord Brent, I strongly advise against hostile action. We're here on a humanitarian mission, but we're fully capable of defending ourselves if necessary." Brent laughed. "You have cargo ships and medical transports. We have warships. This is not a battle you can win." "You're looking at our medical vessels," Foster replied quietly. "You're not seeing the whole picture." She gave a subtle hand signal to her tactical officer. Across the human fleet, every weapon system that had been on standby suddenly achieved active targeting lock. The Krasik warships found themselves painted by over 300 separate targeting solutions. Every human ship in the system, from the smallest cargo hauler to the largest dreadnought, had weapons aimed and ready. The transformation happened in seconds. What had appeared to be a mostly civilian relief fleet revealed itself as a fully armed armada. Even the cargo haulers had point defense systems and missile batteries. The corporate security vessels carried weapons that matched military specifications, and the actual military ships had enough firepower to reduce the 3 Krasik vessels to debris in minutes. Brent's confident expression vanished. His tactical officer was frantically reporting the targeting locks, the weapons signatures, the overwhelming force arrayed against them. They had expected to find a vulnerable relief operation. Instead, they faced an armada that had simply chosen not to display its teeth until provoked. Foster's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "As I said, we're here on a humanitarian mission. Our medical operations will continue uninterrupted. You have 2 options. You can leave peacefully, or you can find out exactly how effective human weapon systems are. Choose quickly." On Revathi Prime, Hollies watched the confrontation unfold through sensor data transmitted from the human ships. He had thought the human fleet was impressive when it arrived. Now he understood it was also terrifying. They had come prepared to save lives and defend them if necessary. 300 ships working in perfect coordination, maintaining humanitarian operations while simultaneously presenting an overwhelming military threat. The Krasic warships held position for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then Brent's face reappeared on screen, his pride clearly wounded but his survival instinct intact. "There has been a misunderstanding," Brent said stiffly. "We were not aware of the Revatha's existing arrangements with humanity. We will withdraw and file a formal diplomatic inquiry about this incident." "You do that," Foster replied. "And Warlord, the next time you see a species asking for help, maybe you should actually try helping them instead of waiting for them to get desperate enough to accept exploitation." The Krasic ships turned and jumped out of the system. Foster allowed herself a small smile before addressing her fleet. "Stand down from combat alert. Resume humanitarian operations. Good work, everyone." Captain Davis, watching from steady hand, let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. His cargo hauler had been prepared to fight alongside the military vessels if necessary. The thought was both terrifying and strangely empowering. They had come to help, but they had also been ready to protect those who needed protection. News of the confrontation spread rapidly through local space networks. The story was simple and shocking. Humanity had responded to a distress call with overwhelming force, but used that force only for protection and aid. They had faced down predators without firing a shot, defended the vulnerable without demanding payment, and demonstrated that compassion and strength were not mutually exclusive. 6 weeks after the first human ships arrived, the crystal lung outbreak on Revathi Prime was completely contained. Not a single child had died after the humans began treatment. The antibiotics were now being synthesized in Revathi laboratories, and the medical protocols had been integrated into their healthcare system. The crisis was over. Admiral Foster stood in Prime Minister Holly's office, preparing to discuss the fleet's departure. Through the window, she could see human shuttles still moving between the orbital ships and the surface, completing final supply transfers and medical consultations. "We'll begin pulling out tomorrow," Foster said. "Your medical teams have everything they need. The treatment protocols are established. You don't need us anymore." Holly's looked uncomfortable. "Admiral, about compensation. The Revathi government has discussed this extensively. The medical supplies alone are worth millions. The time and resources you've invested, the protection you provided against the Krasic. We need to pay you something." Foster shook her head. "Prime Minister, we don't want payment. You needed help. We provided it. That's the end of the transaction." "But that makes no sense from any economic or political perspective. Why would your people expend these resources for nothing in return?" "Because the return is knowing we helped when help was needed. Because next time we need assistance, maybe you'll remember this and help us. Because building a galaxy where species help each other makes everyone safer and stronger." Foster smiled slightly. "And because it's the right thing to do." Holly studied her for a long moment. "Your species is very strange, Admiral." "We've been told that before." As the human fleet prepared to depart, young Lauren worked with Harper to establish formal communication protocols between the Revathi and human governments. The two had become friends during the crisis, discovering they had similar interests in linguistics and communication theory. Harper had decided to stay on Revathi Prime as an official human liaison, helping to bridge the gap between their peoples. "I can't believe you're giving up your position on the listening post to stay here," Lauren said, helping Harper organize her new office. Harper shrugged. "I found something important here, a purpose. Back at the listening post, I was just monitoring signals and filing reports. Here I'm helping build something. Besides, you Revathi make excellent tea." They both laughed. Then Lauren's expression turned serious. Harper, I need to ask you something. Why did so many humans respond? I've been trying to understand it. Your admiral says it's just what humans do, but it seems like there has to be more to it. Harper considered the question carefully. There's a story from Earth history. Hundreds of years ago, there was a maritime tradition. If a ship sent out a distress signal, every vessel in range responded, no matter who they were or where they were going. Merchant ships, military vessels, even competitors who might normally avoid each other. They all came to help because they understood that someday they might be the ones sending that signal. And humans still follow that tradition. We expanded it. Now it's not just ships. It's colonies, it's species, it's anyone who asks for help. We respond because we know what it's like to need help and have no one come. As the main fleet departed, something unexpected happened. New distress calls began arriving. Other species had heard about the human response to the Revathi crisis. Some were skeptical, some were curious, and some were desperate enough to risk contacting these strange newcomers who apparently helped people for free. A mining colony on the edge of explored space sent a carefully worded request. Their life support systems were failing, and they lacked the engineering expertise to repair them. They had no money to pay for assistance, but hoped humans might at least provide technical advice. A science station studying a neutron star reported that pirates were harassing their supply ships. They needed protection, but could not afford to hire security forces. A refugee population fleeing from a war zone needed transport to safe territory. Their ships were breaking down, and they had nowhere else to turn. Admiral Foster reviewed the requests aboard Resilient Dawn. Her original mission was complete. The Revathi were safe. She should return the fleet to human space and resume normal operations. But as she looked at these new calls for help, she understood this was a defining moment. How humanity responded now would shape how they were viewed across the galaxy. She called a fleet-wide meeting, projecting her image to every ship. We've completed our primary mission. The Revathi crisis is resolved. You've all performed admirably, and Earth Command has authorized our return home. However, we've received new distress calls. Multiple species in various types of crisis, all asking for help. Foster paused, looking at the faces on her screens. Military officers, civilian captains, corporate executives, former pirates. All of them had come together for one mission. Now she was asking them to stay together for many more. I'm not ordering anyone to respond to these calls. This would be voluntary. We'd be splitting the fleet into smaller task forces, dispersing across multiple systems, dealing with situations we haven't scouted or prepared for. It would be dangerous, difficult, and we wouldn't be able to provide the same level of support we had during the Revathi operation. Captain Davis spoke up from steady hand. Admiral, with respect, what kind of help do they need? The mining colony needs engineering support. The science station needs security. The refugees need transport and supplies. Then we can do it, Davis said simply. Those are all things we're equipped to handle. Dr. Ruth's voice came through the channel. Admiral, I didn't come all this way just to help one species. If there are others who need medical assistance, I'm staying. Across the fleet, similar sentiments echoed. The military commanders agreed to provide security and defense. The cargo haulers volunteered to transport refugees. The corporate ships offered their engineering teams. Even the amnestied pirates who had spent years taking from others found purpose in giving instead. Foster felt pride swell in her chest. All right, we'll split into task forces based on the missions. Captain Davis, you'll lead the refugee transport operation. Dr. Chen, coordinate with the medical ships for any health crises. Commander Willis will take the security detail to protect the science station. I'll personally lead the engineering team to the mining colony. The fleet divided smoothly, each group taking the ships and resources best suited to their assigned mission. What had been a single massive armada became multiple smaller fleets. spreading across nearby space to answer calls for help. News of this decision spread even faster than the original Revathi story. The humans had not just responded to one crisis. They were actively seeking out others who needed help. Species across the galaxy began to take notice. The Galactic Council, a loose organization of established species that had existed for thousands of years, convened an emergency session. Secretary Iris, a veteran diplomat from one of the older civilizations, presented the human situation to the assembly. These newcomers have deployed over 300 ships on humanitarian missions, Iris explained. They've provided aid worth billions in resources. They've defended vulnerable species against predatory forces, and they refuse all payment or territorial concessions. A council member from a species that profited from selling protection sneered. They're clearly playing a long game, building goodwill to establish political leverage. Perhaps, Iris replied, or perhaps they actually mean what they say. Regardless of their ultimate motives, their actions are having significant effects. The Krasic have withdrawn from 2 territorial disputes rather than risk confrontation with human forces. Smaller species are beginning to request human assistance instead of accepting exploitative agreements. The traditional power structures are being disrupted. The debate lasted for hours, but eventually a proposal emerged. The Galactic Council would formally recognize humanity's right to respond to distress calls in neutral space. It was a calculated move, legitimizing human actions while also establishing boundaries and protocols. 8 months had passed since Lauren accidentally sent the message that changed everything. She stood in her new office as Director of Interspecies Communications, reviewing reports from across the sector. The position had been created specifically to manage the growing relationship between the Revathi and humanity, and she still sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. Harper worked at the desk across from her, translating the latest human medical journals into Revathi language. They had become an effective team, bridging the cultural and linguistic gaps between their peoples. The friendship that began during a crisis had evolved into a professional partnership that benefited both species. Another human relief fleet just passed through the system, Harper said, looking up from her work. They're heading to the Carlin sector, famine situation. Lauren nodded. It had become almost routine now. Human ships constantly moved through Revathi space, always heading somewhere that needed help. The Revathi had granted them permanent transit rights, along with resupply stations and maintenance facilities. It was the least they could do. The mining colony that Captain Davis had helped was now operational again, their life support systems repaired by human engineers who had stayed for 3 months teaching local workers how to maintain the equipment. The science station that needed protection had been defended by human security forces until they could establish their own defensive network. The refugees had been transported to safe worlds and given supplies to start new lives. Each successful mission generated more requests for help. The pattern was consistent. Humans responded, provided aid without demanding payment, and left behind grateful populations who told others about these strange newcomers who actually meant what they said about helping. Dr. Ruth had not returned to human space at all. She traveled between crisis zones, training local medical personnel and establishing treatment protocols for diseases that had never been studied by human science. She had aged during the constant work, her hands shakier than before, but her eyes held a contentment that retirement had never provided. She had found her purpose again. Admiral Foster had become something of a legend, the military officer who mobilized an armada for a medical emergency, the commander who faced down predators without firing a shot, the leader who chose compassion over conquest. Earth Command had promoted her twice and given her authority to establish permanent rapid response fleets stationed across human space. The Galactic Council's recognition of human relief operations had been grudging but official. Humanity now had legal authority to respond to distress calls in neutral space, subject to certain protocols and limitations. Some council members still suspected ulterior motives, but they could not deny the results. Conflicts were decreasing. Vulnerable species were surviving crises that would have destroyed them before. The galaxy was becoming marginally safer. Not everyone appreciated the change. Species that profited from exploitation found their business models disrupted. The Crasic Dominion had lost multiple territorial acquisitions when their targets requested human protection instead of accepting Crasic terms. Other predatory civilizations faced similar problems. There was wealth to be made in others' desperation, and humans were eliminating that market. A formal complaint had been filed with the Galactic Council, accusing humanity of economic interference and military intimidation. The hearing was scheduled for next month, and Secretary Iris had personally requested that Admiral Foster attend to represent the human position. Foster prepared for the hearing aboard a diplomatic transport approaching the Council's central station. She reviewed the accusations carefully. Yes, human presence had disrupted traditional power structures. Yes, some species had lost profitable arrangements. Yes, humanity's willingness to provide free assistance made it difficult for others to charge for similar services. The hearing chamber was impressive, a massive circular room where hundreds of species gathered to debate galactic affairs. Foster stood at the center, surrounded by representatives from civilizations that had existed for millennia before humans even discovered fire. The accusations were read formally: economic disruption, unauthorized military deployments, interference in sovereign affairs, violation of traditional territorial agreements. The list went on. When it was Foster's turn to respond, she stood quietly for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. Members of the Galactic Council, I will not dispute the accusations. Human relief operations have disrupted existing power structures. We have deployed military assets without seeking prior approval from this body. We have interfered in situations where other species claim jurisdiction. All of this is true. She paused, looking around the chamber. But let me ask you something. When the Ravathi children were dying, where were you? When the mining colony's life support was failing, who responded? When refugees needed transport to safety, which of your species volunteered ships? The chamber was silent. We did not ask permission to help because help should not require permission. We did not seek payment because people in crisis should not be exploited. We interfered in your traditional power structures because those structures allowed suffering when it could have been prevented. Foster's voice remained level, but there was steel in it. You say we're disrupting the galactic order. Good. If your order requires species to die while waiting for help that comes with strings attached, then your order deserves to be disrupted. Secretary Ira stood from the Council's senior seats. Admiral Foster, the Council recognizes that human intentions appear genuine, but there are legitimate concerns about your methods. You deploy overwhelming military force, even for humanitarian missions. You act unilaterally without consulting established authorities. How can we trust that you won't use this power for conquest instead of aid? You can't, Foster replied honestly. Trust has to be earned. We've been earning it for 8 months, one mission at a time. Every species we've helped can testify about our actions. We ask nothing in return. We leave when the crisis is resolved. We share our technology and knowledge freely. Judge us by our actions, not by your fears. The debate continued for hours, but eventually, a resolution emerged. The Council would establish formal protocols for humanitarian interventions, recognizing humanity's right to respond while also creating oversight mechanisms. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, which usually meant it was fair. As Foster left the hearing chamber, Secretary Iris approached her privately. You've changed things, Admiral. Whether the old powers like it or not, humanity has established a new precedent. Species help each other not for profit, but because it's right. That's a radical concept in galactic politics. It shouldn't be radical, Foster said. It should be normal. Back on Revathi Prime, Lauren received notification that a memorial was being constructed at the medical center where Dr. Ruth first landed. The inscription would read, "They came because someone asked for help." Simple words, but they captured everything that had happened. Harper helped organize the dedication ceremony, coordinating with human officials to ensure Admiral Foster could attend. The memorial itself was modest, a simple stone marker in the medical center's garden, but its meaning was profound. Species from across the sector sent representatives. The mining colonists came to honor the engineers who saved them. The science station staff arrived to thank the security forces who protected them. The refugees sent a delegation to express gratitude for their transport to safety. And the Revathi people gathered to remember the day they learned that not all powerful species were predators. Dr. Ruth attended the ceremony, looking tired but happy. She had trained over 400 medical professionals across 20 different species. The xenomedicine network she helped establish was saving lives across multiple sectors. She planned to continue working until her hands completely failed her, and probably for some time after that. Captain Davis brought Steady Hand to orbit for the ceremony. His cargo hauler had been officially designated as a humanitarian transport vessel, and he spent his time moving supplies between crisis zones. He had discovered that hauling medicine and food felt better than hauling construction materials ever had. Admiral Foster spoke briefly at the dedication, keeping her words simple. 8 months ago, a young communications officer made a mistake. That mistake brought humanity to this world, but it also taught us something important. We learned that there are species across this galaxy who need help. We learned that we have the capacity to provide that help, and we learned that doing so makes us better than we were before. She looked at Lauren, who stood nearby looking both proud and embarrassed. "So thank you for that mistake. Thank you for accidentally calling for help, because in answering, we discovered who we want to be." After the ceremony, Lauren and Harper walked through the medical center's halls. The children's wing was busy but cheerful. Every child there would survive because humans had brought medicine. Every family had been spared the grief of loss because strangers from across space had decided to help. "Do you think it will last?" Lauren asked. "This new way of doing things?" Harper considered the question. "I don't know. There are still species that profit from exploitation. There are still powers that see compassion as weakness. But humanity has shown that strength and kindness aren't opposites. Other species are starting to follow our example. Maybe that's enough." On Earth, the public had embraced the relief operations enthusiastically. Funding flowed freely for new ships, medical supplies, and training programs. Young people enlisted specifically to join humanitarian missions. The relief fleets had become a source of pride, a demonstration of what humanity could accomplish when focused on helping rather than conquering. Admiral Foster received her next assignment shortly after returning from Revathi Prime. A cluster of colonies near the frontier was experiencing system-wide power failures. Cause unknown, but millions of people were without heat or light. She had 72 hours to mobilize a response fleet and deploy to their location. She looked at the request, smiled slightly, and opened communication channels to her commanders. Within an hour, ships were moving toward the rally point. Within a day, they would depart. Within a week, they would arrive and begin helping people who desperately needed it. Someone had asked for help, and humanity, as always, would answer.